Over the past few years, there has been a significant amount of spotlight cast upon the wife of the Commandant of Auschwitz and how much she knew about what was going on inside of the walls of the concentration camp where she lived next to. Hedwig Höss was the wife of Rudolf Höss, a man who ran Auschwitz for many years and built it from the ground up. The pair had a lot in common when they began dating, and they soon married quickly after, but Hedwig Höss and her children remained by her husband's side when he left for work every morning inside of Auschwitz. I'd probably suggest that despite the fact she claimed that she never knew what was happening inside of Auschwitz, that she knew really what was going on, as she would have smelt the crematoria ovens, and it is known that prisoners who worked inside of the Höss villa next door to Auschwitz were mistreated and regularly beaten by Hedwig and even her children. But one thing that is not very well known is that the wife of the Auschwitz Commandant is actually buried in America, and her body still lies in a grave within a cemetery in Fairfax County, Virginia, under a simple gravestone that carries the word Mutti, or Mother. But how did this happen, and why is the grave of the Auschwitz Commandant's wife in the USA? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Rudolf Höss and his wife Hedwig married in 1929, but her husband had a very dark past. He had even been locked up for murdering a political opponent upon the orders of Hitler's future private secretary, Martin Bormann, but Hedwig Hensel must have liked a bad boy. The pair met at meetings of the Ottoman League, a political group that encouraged Germans to get back to the land and begin to farm, and to turn their backs on cities and industrial factories. They were both very outspoken, but Hedwig and Rudolf would then work on creating a large family. They had 5 children, 3 daughters and 2 sons, but the youngest daughter of the Höss family would actually be born inside of Auschwitz and the complex in the camp, specifically within the hospitals, a place where thousands of people would be exterminated through the use of lethal injection or sadistic human experimentation. Following their marriage, Rudolf Höss joined the Nazi Party and transitioned to become a member of the SS, and he became known to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS. Hedwig, whilst her husband was out on party duties, would stay at home and look after her children, and she also became a member of the Nazi Party herself. She embodied the values that the Nazis wanted for women, but her husband would rise throughout the ranks of the SS, and he was even in charge of the firing squad within Sachsenhausen concentration camp. However, Heinrich Himmler then dispatched Rudolf Höss to create a new camp in Poland, which became Auschwitz. Höss produced a report on whether the site would work as a place to exterminate thousands, and Auschwitz grew on a huge scale to become the largest single site of slaughter in the Second World War. But within Höss's plans were even drawings for a residence for the man who would lead the camp, the Commandant, to live with his family. Rudolf Höss was ultimately given leadership and authority to control and create the camp, and Hedwig Höss came with him, and the children went and lived in a specially built villa right next door to the camp. Inside of their household, they had a number of slaves who were prisoners from the camp, who tidied and also maintained the gardens. From the Höss villa, the crematoria chimneys could not be seen, and the upper windows were even obscured, so that the Höss family's view was not of the death chambers. A large concrete wall had even been put up specially for the purpose of obscuring the smoke, but from the testimony of many witnesses and former prisoners of Auschwitz, the smoke billowed all over Auschwitz, meaning that regularly the Höss villa would have been engulfed in the smoke from the burning of bodies, those victims being sent into the gas chambers by Rudolf Höss's guards and him himself. Inside of the Höss villa, the family lived a relatively normal life, and Hedwig later claimed that she had no idea what her husband was doing, but every day he would leave the villa, kiss his wife and children goodbye, and he then went to work inside of the deadly camp, where he would kill thousands every single day, before then returning home. There was even a tunnel built in the basement of his family home for him to access the camp and then return home through it. Hedwig Höss must have known what was going on, and she encouraged her children to treat the slaves inside of the Höss villa roughly. One former gardener who worked inside the house claimed, "Frau Höss reminded me about an incident, forcing me in doing whatever she asked to do. The couple hated everything that was Polish. Frau Höss, as in Mrs. Höss, often used to say to me that all the Jews had to disappear from the globe, and there was even a time for the English Jews." She held very anti-Semitic ideas, similar ones to her husband, but one thing to consider is that as the killing operation increased in Auschwitz, the crematorias could not cope, and with this the bodies were burned in pits next to the outskirts of the site, and without doubt the smoke from these would have penetrated the Höss compound. It is inconceivable that Hedwig Höss had no idea what was going on, and she was someone who was regularly being given gifts and valuables which had been taken directly from the prisoners who arrived at Auschwitz, some of those being killed straight away, and the family became very wealthy. She could have been passively complicit, but there was allegedly one incident in which she actually confronted her husband about his crimes at Auschwitz. She overheard senior Nazi Gauleiter of Silesia, Fritz Brecht, talking with another SS man about what was actually happening at Auschwitz involving the gas chambers and the crematoria. Hedwig Höss was then seen flying into a fit of disgusted rage at her husband about what he was doing at work, and she even allegedly refused to share a bed with him. Rudolf Höss was the man who had settled upon the use of poison gas to exterminate over 1 million people, and he also had an affair behind his wife's back with a female prisoner who was believed was abused, and this led to him being sacked. We don't know if the truth about this affair was revealed to his wife or not, but at the end of the Second World War, Hedwig Höss was seized by the Allied forces in Flensburg. She had moved there with her eldest son, and tried to live quietly, but in the custody of the British Army's 92nd Field Security Section, they knew exactly who she was. Auschwitz had been liberated months before, and the crimes were very well documented by the Soviets, and Hedwig Höss was asked many times where her husband was. She eventually gave over information about the fact he was living in Gottrupel under the name Franz Lang, posing as a gardener. But their wedding ring was what gave his identity away, as the inscription inside of this carried his real name and his wife's name, and this was discovered when he was seized by British forces. Rudolf Höss was brought to the Nuremberg trials, not as a defendant, but as a defence witness for SS leader Ernst Kaltenbrunner, and he would write to his wife before his execution inside of his former camp, and he said, I quote, "Based on my present knowledge, I can see today clearly, severely and bitterly for me, that the entire ideology about the world, in which I believe so firmly and unswervingly, was based on completely wrong premises, and had to absolutely collapse one day. And so my actions in the service of this ideology were completely wrong, even though I faithfully believed the idea was correct. Now it was very logical that strong doubts grew within me, and whether my turning away from my belief in God was based on completely wrong premises. It was a hard struggle, but I have again found my faith in God. On a specially built gallows inside of Auschwitz's main camp, Rudolf Höss was executed on the 16th of April 1947. But Hedwig Höss led a very quiet life after World War II, and she changed her name from Höss and tried to distance herself from her husband's actions, and tried to make better chances for her life in a post-war Germany. She was actually brought to denazification proceedings, which aimed to work out how much of a Nazi she truly was, and those in charge actually somehow believed that she was actually telling the truth when she claimed she did not know about her husband's crimes within Auschwitz, and they accepted that she was somehow ignorant to what her husband was doing for work. She tried to escape her husband's reputation, and she did manage this, and she was not hounded by the media, and she did live very quietly. Hedwig Höss did remarry, and her daughter Bridget moved to America, and she died recently a few years ago. However, Hedwig Höss did visit her daughter regularly, who was actually living in Washington at some time, a stone's throw away from the White House. When her mother came to America from Germany to visit, Bridget Höss claimed that they never spoke about Auschwitz, and that, in the 1970s, that Hedwig visited her daughter regularly in Washington, and they never spoke about the camp, and Bridget claimed it was too painful. I'm sure my mum knew what was going on in the camp. She was very sad about it, but she couldn't help. She just tried to be nice with the children and with my father. My mum was a nice person, period. She later tried to make her mother out to have been the angel of Auschwitz, but this could not be further from the truth. Hedwig Höss had benefited greatly from the crimes of her husband and the camp, and she benefited financially from wealth stolen from Auschwitz's dead, and because of her denazification status, very little of this would have been confiscated from her. That probably shows how she managed to pay for many flights to America. She was somehow allowed to repeatedly enter the US, presumably as the authorities thought that she was no threat. But it was on one of these visits to her daughter in America that Hedwig Höss died, and her body would never be repatriated back to Germany. Hedwig Höss died on the 15th of September 1989 while she was visiting her daughter in the States, and she was then actually buried inside of National Memorial Park in Idlewood in Fairfax County, Virginia. Now, presumably, the local authorities knew who they were actually burying within the cemetery. This wasn't the body of a nobody. The Höss family and Hedwig's daughter would have had to apply for special permission to bury her mother, a German national, in the cemetery and inside of the States. There would have been an option to repatriate Hedwig Höss's body back to Germany, but this was never taken up. She died at the age of 90, and there is little information out there about a funeral, but presumably one took place for the Commandant of Auschwitz's wife, and most probably this ceremony would have attracted some Germans or possible even former Nazis. But what is also strange is that within the cemetery in Fairfax County, Hedwig Höss's grave is marked by a gravestone, but this carries the word Mutti, meaning mother in German. Her real name is not engraved on the stone to not attract suspicion, but it is true that the wife of the Auschwitz Commandant is buried in an American cemetery on American soil. What Frau Höss really knew about the goings-on at Auschwitz is highly debated, but it's most probable she knew exactly what her husband was doing each day when he left for work. But still today, inside of that American cemetery in Virginia, the wife of one of the most prolific Nazis and members of the SS is still buried, and I can guarantee that thousands have passed by her grave and did not know who was actually buried inside of the plot. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.